What's happening, everybody out there? I'm Venomousfatman, and here's a brand new OTGT for all of you out there. This time, I'm talking about something a little more interesting that I've wanted to talk about for a while. I've been gaming for many, many years, for pretty much most of my entire life. I grew up back in the days from kind of like the 8 to 16-bit era, where, things like the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo, even the NES were still kind of, fairly new or fairly kind of like really hitting the spotlight, when gaming was still kind of, if you could say, its infantile stages. I didn't grow up in the early 80s, obviously. I was born in 88, but I grew up at a good time when gaming was starting to really become popular, where there was a lot of cool things coming out of video games. Now, one of the things I have always looked at, and one of the things I've always observed throughout the years, is not only how we play video games, but also how we view video games and how we actually look at video games. Not necessarily meaning graphics or a type of like style and such. I'm talking about, specifically this time, I'm talking about game box art, game cover art. When I was growing up, I was actually one of those kids where you would go to like a Toys R Us or any sort of kind of like hobby store, and they would have video games on sale there. And most of the games at the time, when I go to buy my Sega Genesis games, the box art for games wouldn't necessarily be actual screenshots or actual pre-rendered images from in-game. Unlike what we have now, now these days we have more kind of like, 3D models or different types of things in Photoshop where we take snapshots, or take the models of a game, take a couple shots here and there, slap it on the cover, and it's a wrap. It looks cool. People buy it based on the name. No, that wasn't the case back in the day. Back in the day when I was still a kid, I'd actually go to a game store, look at the box art of a particular type of game, and because it was much more in like those olden days, they would really have kind of like, different types of paintings on the actual cover art. So they would like the game developers would actually hire an artist to actually draw out or, make a painting or a sketch or something to put on the cover art. Or even, kind of early Photoshop or early kind of like, composites and stuff. They would take, I guess you could say like painting or kind of like sketched out images and put it on top of either, a background that was actually a picture from real life or something that they would blend the two. Kind of like an early version of a sophisticated Photoshop composite, if you would. It's not so rampant. Well, it wasn't so rampant back then as it is now. Pretty much you can't really tell the difference hardly anymore, whether it's composite or not, even though most of the stuff is. But here's what I mean. I'm actually going to show you guys some games from my own personal collection, both new and old, that kind of gives you some examples. We're going to kind of, take a look at some of this stuff. But anyway, here I got a couple. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different Sega Genesis games because I was a big Genesis fan. I still am. I collect them. But here's what I mean. Take this game, for example. This actually came with my system. The original Altered Beast. Now, I know a lot of you classic gamers out there are probably going to get a little nostalgic and stuff, but check out this box cover art. You see how awesome that is? Now, don't get me wrong. This actually has nothing to do with the actual game. If you look at the back, it's completely different, from what the actual game is. And if you have ever played Altered Beast, you would know it obviously does not look like this. But when you look at this actual box cover art, just first glancing, not even knowing about the name or whatnot, you're going to look at it and be like, whoa, that looks freaking cool. It's going to get you hyped up. You're going to look at it and be like, something, maybe I should check out this game. This actually looks pretty awesome. You got a dude on here that looks like a werewolf with a whole bunch, I guess, monsters or something that look kind of creepy in the background. This game actually looks cool. And obviously when you look at the game, it's not going to be the same, but you're going to kind of get the general idea. This game, box cover art, is going to get you hyped up and it's going to get you enticed to actually buy this game. That's one example. Let's take a look at another one that's the same thing. That's also got that kind of like painting style. Biohazard Battle. Well, not per se. This isn't really kind of like a painting, like an actual like fine art painting. This is much more like an illustration, if you would, along the lines of, let's say, like a comic book or something. Not Alex Ross quality, but, you could get pretty damn good, comic book art now these days. You look at it and it's this giant worm with some type of spaceship and stuff, and it looks cool. You look at it and be like, oh, this looks like a pretty cool looking game, You actually check it out. Obviously, it's going to look different, but the box art really draws you in. Let's take a look at another one, probably my most favorite, to be honest with you, of the classic games that I have as far as box art. Everybody remembers Ghosts and Goblins. The sequel to it, Ghouls and Ghosts, this one being for the Sega Genesis. I'm sorry, the package is a little messed up. But look how cool this box cover art is. You got Arthur, which just, if you knew nothing about ghouls and ghosts, you got just this knight here. He's got lightning coming out of him. You got a giant monster in the background, and it looks semi-realistic the way it's actually painted and drawn out. It looks cool. This is a game you would be like, whoa, this actually looks sweet. Looks really cool. I gotta check this out. I get really hyped right now. Looks awesome. Now, I'll just briefly go through a couple more examples of classic games, then I'll show you something a little more contemporary to kind of drive the point home. You got these other 3 Sega Genesis games. You got Wings of War, which you look at it, same type of idea, a painted image that, has some sort of dealing with the actual game. The game itself looks different. Obviously, it's a little black here, guys. I'm sorry about that, so it's a little hard to see some of the images because it's very, very old. Look at it here again. You can check it out. Looks really cool. Awesome. Dude flying. He's got a machine gun or some sort. It looks awesome. Gets you hyped up. Here's another one. You guys, obviously, if you're all big fighting game fans out there, and especially if you're a classic fighting game fan, y'all remember Eternal Champions. Check out this cover art. It's a different take from Street Fighter, obviously. Street Fighter had its own style at the time, pseudo realistic / anime art style. This one is much more realistic, and it's got different looking characters that obviously at the time had never been before seen. Looks really, really, really cool in the way that it's drawn and stuff. This would obviously be a box cover art that would really catch your eye if you're like, at the time, glancing through a store of different Sega Genesis games. Looks really cool. The back, obviously, it's got, game screenshots and stuff. That's another thing I should mention. Besides the front cover art of things, throughout the years of actual video games, the back is also something that we actually kind of take for granted a little bit. That's also changed as well. Because besides the cool stuff in the front, usually we'll have like a bunch of screenshots and a whole bunch of text or something talking about a specific type of game, or how it plays and such, or what are its features and things like that. You have it in like a game like Eternal Champions, which got a bunch of screenshots and all this text and little tiny text all over the place talking about the specific type of game and what it's got to offer. Now these days you have a lot of games that do the same thing. If anything, sometimes it's a little overboard because now instead of just having it once in English, you also got in like multiple languages like French or Spanish, even Japanese if you would believe it or not, depending if you import games. But you also got some other games, and some other companies that decide to actually not put so much and actually kind of draw you in a little more on your curiosity. Some guys or a couple game developers that are actually really good at this and really kind of are like a master of this craft. Square Enix. If you look at a lot of their kind of more recent Final Fantasy games and even some of their other RPGs, they have the front cover which has some amazing looking, rendered image. In the back, all they say is like a catchphrase or something, to kind of like pique your curiosity. It's got a couple shots, just saying like one line per shot, and that's it. And then pretty much you're expected to kind of, check it out if you want to actually explore what more that the game has to offer. It's a whole bunch of different things going on. But anyway, let's continue. You guys remember Maximum Carnage. This actually, the cover art looks awesome because this is something that a lot of people got hyped up for. Even if you weren't a Marvel fan, you guys can see that it's Carnage and an actual shot of New York City. Obviously you got pictures of Spider-Man and Venom and, all the text and stuff on the bottom. But look at that, how awesome that image looks. How hyped would you get, even if you didn't know anything about Marvel, or comics for that matter, you would look at this and be like, whoa, what the heck? Like, I gotta check this game out. And even to kind of drive the point home of what I was saying before about the back, this one has a lot of stuff going on in the back. A whole bunch of screenshots or whatnot, a whole bunch of text showing all the heroes of what you guys could actually get in this game. That's pretty crazy. My point is this, because now we're going to look at some of the more contemporary games. I like the more older game style of art, box cover art and stuff, because those are the types of art and the types of techniques that they used in the day that really got someone hyped up, because obviously games weren't as sophisticated graphically wise as they are now. But so they really needed something to kind of draw you in. And that's what I kind of missed about, back in the golden age of, or the golden days of me actually playing video games. Now, if you look at some of the stuff now, these are just a few examples. This doesn't necessarily mean that any of these games are bad, but we're just solely basically just looking at the cover art, if you would actually get hyped up for this. Let's start off with something like from the PlayStation 2, King of Fighters Maximum Impact. Now, obviously this game was in 3D, and it was a King of Fighters game, and many of you out there have your own reservations of it. Look at the cover art, this is just there. It's just some dude's back, and it just says KOF. So if you really knew nothing, number one, it doesn't even say King of Fighters, it just says KOF Maximum Impact. If you didn't know anything about King of Fighters at all, obviously from the name, you're going to be like, okay, what the heck is this all about and why do I care? And also, like I said, there's not really something to draw you in. It's just a dude's back with a tattoo. Nothing really special. The back obviously has a little more stuff and it actually, says it's King of Fighters game. But if you were just to solely see this in the store and just not know anything about SNK or Neo Geo or whatnot, you would probably pass this one up. It doesn't really get you hyped up all that much. Let's move on. Let's look at something like Street Fighter. In my opinion, you guys look at, Super Street Fighter 4. You look at the cover art for this. Obviously, it's got a bunch of characters and stuff on it. So people that knew what Street Fighter is or know what Street Fighter is, which there are quite a few people, would obviously get hyped up for this game. But if you didn't know anything about it, and you just slowly looked at this, at a bunch of characters, you'd be like, oh, okay, it's a fighting game. It's got a bunch of characters on it. If you look at, obviously, go back and look at the original Street Fighter 4's cover art, it is much cooler looking than this one is. This one has much more of that ink style art of what they actually use throughout the game, the ink blot kind of like, Japanese ink painting style. And it looks a lot more cooler. It looks, a little more dynamic, and it looks like you would get somebody hyped up more instead of just solely basing it on the name. Whereas this one is more kind of reliant on the actual name, Super Street Fighter 4. And Capcom, obviously. If you got the collector's edition of the original Street Fighter 4, you got even cooler box art where it just showed Ryu in that ink style look, just walking towards you, and it just says Street Fighter 4 below him. That got a lot of people hyped up because that was also the teaser image for Street Fighter 4 back in the day. Now, let's look at a different game that's actually getting a sequel pretty soon. Gears of War. Gears of War 2. Gears of War 1 obviously had a different look to it, obviously, but I don't have a copy of it now, so I can't really say for much. Gears of War 2, this was actually part of a giant image that was, a big kind of like poster image that was, I guess you want to say the teaser poster, or the poster, publicity thing that they had for the actual game. The reason why I say this one isn't really all that great and really not one of the best things I would actually, get really hyped up for, because again, if you didn't know nothing about Gears of War and you don't really know anything about what's going on with the story and stuff, you're gonna be like, okay, it's just a dude with a gun that looks like he has like a chainsaw, which I bet you wouldn't even catch it in the first glance in the corner. Now, if they've had a way or some sort of thing where if they showed an image of like Marcus Phoenix, cutting open like one of the locusts or something, it would have been a lot more cooler, and I can understand someone getting more hyped up over it. Now, I'm driving the point home. Let's look, really quickly, just two more. You got the orange box, which is just kind of blah. If you know nothing about these games, you're not really going to care. It's just 3 things on there. Obviously, you would have to look at the back. It's just, again, 3 things. If you didn't know nothing about these games, you wouldn't really care. You go look at a thing for sports games. Sports games are a little bit different because sports games, usually it's more heavily reliant on your knowledge of sports and obviously who's on the cover and the type of players and stuff. You look at a thing like Fight Night, a lot of the kind of boxing games and stuff usually have 2 competitors going at it. This one being the coolest out of most of the games that have come out because obviously it's Muhammad Ali versus classic Mike Tyson. So if you know a little bit about boxing, you know a little bit about these 2 guys and the history behind them, it's going to obviously, catch your interest and stuff. However, if you knew nothing about boxing, you knew nothing about EA Sports and such, and it was just looking at it just like this, guys, if you didn't know obviously who these 2 people were, you would just see just 2 boxers just punching each other and would just get the point that it's a boxing game. It wouldn't really hype you up unless you were really into boxing. So anyway, that's just my whole look, kind of like a little in-depth / pseudo glance over game box art. I'm hoping at some point, as we move forward throughout the years, games will get a little more clever or a little more kind of like intricate and dynamic in the way that they actually present their box art, to gamers out there and to, the normal consumer. Because that's kind of like the first impression that a game has on you. Obviously, we have trailers and all that stuff, down the line. And usually a lot of background knowledge is already embedded into us before we actually go to the store. But I'm hoping, there's obviously a couple out there right now that obviously I can't remember or mention at the moment. But I'm hoping down the line we get different companies that get much more crazier and much more clever in the way they actually present their games in their box art. Whether it's going back to that painting type of style or coming up with new dynamic ways to kind of blend in all the techniques that we have with Photoshop and pre-rendered cutscenes or shots and different things like that. So Anyway, that's just my whole take on the thing, guys. Leave your comments and video responses. I don't mind. Just keep it civil. Let me know what you guys think of game box art. If you guys like, the way things are now, or if you want things to be much more older style, or do you, any sort of like thoughts and things that you might have about game art, or game box art, I should say. Any of the games that I mentioned on there, you could talk about them in the comment section below. And I'll talk to you guys again soon. That's all I got. This has been some OTGT right now. Only the goddamn truth. I'll talk to y'all later, people. Peace out.